This week's module is Federalism. Federalism is defined as the division of political authority between a central government and state or local governments. The states and local governments are given considerable sovereignty, but they are still accountable to the federal government. The division of power and authority between federal, state, and local governments means that power, funding, ideas, and interactions flow up and down the system of governmental structures. There are three conceptual models of federalism which characterize the relationships between federal, state, and local governments: the layer cake model, the marble cake model, and the picket fence model. The layer cake model is representative of the early years of the U.S. It emphasized the division between powers at the national and state levels. The division of authority between levels of government is like layers in a cake, attributing certain authority to each level and emphasizing their distinctiveness. The national level bureaucracies implement national defense, print money, provide postal services, and regulate interstate commerce. The state level bureaucracies provide public education, build and maintain roads, and provide health services. At the local level, bureaucrats provide basic services such as fire and police protection, garbage removal, and sewage treatment. In this model, there is little interaction between bureaucrats at the different levels. In the marble cake model, intergovernmental cooperation and the sharing of functions blurred the distinguishing lines between the levels, making it difficult to say where national government ended and the state and local levels began. The national, state, and local bureaucrats are all involved in providing educational services, police protection, building and maintaining roads. An example of this model is the New Deal programs of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the 1930s. By the 1960s, there was a close fiscal relationship among the various levels of government. As a result, the national government was financially better off and could provide various grants to states and cities. This is because the federal government is better at raising revenue through corporate and personal income taxes. Since the 1930s, federal grants have increased enormously in number, scope, and the relative proportion for state and local projects. When a grant is provided, the granting government or agency prescribes certain standards or requirements and then actively monitors the grantee's spending of those funds to ensure compliance with the grant's intended purpose. The interactions among all levels of government over a policy area that is being promoted through a grant program develop into a complex pattern of interaction known as the picket fence model. Specifically, in this model, the bureaucrats at different levels of government share a common policy or programmatic concern, and they interact more often with each other than with others at their same level of government. To better understand how federalism has operated in the U.S., we'll now look at the eras of federalism: dual federalism, cooperative federalism, creative federalism, new federalism, and renewed federalism. The first period of U.S. federalism is known as dual federalism. This was the beginning of our federal system and dominated intergovernmental relations among governments from the early 1800s until 1930. Dual federalism reflects the view that national and state governments were separate and unique. The value of responsiveness was emphasized. Also, economically, the freedom of the individual was emphasized, and government practiced the principle of laissez-faire economics, which means let the people do as they choose. After World War I, as the U.S. became a major international power, the economy burst in 1929 with the crash of the stock market and the start of the Great Depression. This led to massive changes in how government and politics should be conducted. Consequently, a new era of cooperative federalism emerged that lasted from the 1930s until the 1950s. Cooperative federalism emphasized that national, state, and local governments were cooperating agents who interacted with each other, jointly facing and solving common problems rather than view each other as competitors. The magnitude of unemployment and poverty during the Great Depression were problems that stretched beyond jurisdictional lines, city to city, state to state. President FDR's New Deal programs called for greater cooperation among state, federal, and local authorities. A revived post-war economy, the U.S. as a world superpower, the Cold War, and the Civil Rights Movement influenced this new era of federalism. This era occurred during the 1960s and was greatly influenced by the Johnson administration. Johnson wanted to create a great society and conduct a domestic war on poverty. The Great Society and War on Poverty led to the growth of government grants from 12 to 300. Of note is the expansion of welfare programs and affirmative action programs. This era of federalism involved joint planning and decision-making at all levels of government, including partnerships with business and nonprofit social organizations. This era was ushered in as a result of the government's involvement in the Vietnam War and in response to the Great Society. This era occurred from 1968 until 1980 and wanted to return more autonomy to the states. It was first articulated by President Richard Nixon and maintained a significant level of federal funding, but modified grants from project grants to block grants. Block grants had fewer strings attached. They provide federal funding for a general policy area of governmental activity, such as community development, education, health services, and crime control. The state can decide how the funds should be used. New federalism promoted decentralization by devolving some programs from the national government back to the states. Essentially, new federalism sought to make government more efficient and management more businesslike. These values were expanded in the 1980s under President Ronald Reagan. Renewed federalism is simply the Reagan administration's version of new federalism. Reagan's approach differed from that of Nixon by promoting supply-side economics, which relied on massive, across-the-board tax cuts that were supposed to expand the economy enough to raise federal tax revenues and thus recover the costs of the tax cuts. Reagan also strengthened national defense by significantly increasing defense spending and new technology, such as an anti-missile system known as Star Wars. The federal government's deficit in the 8 years of the Reagan administration tripled the federal debt. In short, renewed federalism emphasized several primary values. 1. Order in society, as seen in the war on drugs and the war on crime. 2. Capitalism. 3. Individual rights. 4. Limited government. 5. Rationality in government decision-making. 6. Deregulation and devolution from Washington, D.C. to state and local governments. Some costs of federalism include 1. Negative externalities, 2. Coordination problems, 3. Unresponsiveness, 4. Localistic biases, 5. Inequality, 6. Bias, 7. Loss of accountability, 8. Evasion of responsibility. The benefits of federalism include 1. Flexibility, 2. Preventing abuse of power, 3. Encouraging innovation, 4. Competition, 5. Preventing management overload, 6. Coping with conflict, 7. Fostering participation, 8. Encouraging self-reliance, 9. Military and diplomatic strength, 10. Economic benefits. Ultimately, in federalism, the existence of many decision-making arenas, federal, state, and local governments, encourages groups to try to expand, maintain, or contract the scope of conflict to a level at which a group's prospects for success are greater. This process, in turn, influences the relative importance of each level of government in various policy decisions.